Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Behind the Servants. Today, we are going to be looking into what I have dubbed the Roman Tragics. When you are an empire as prolific and as powerful as Rome was, you are bound to make more than just a few enemies. History is written by the victors, but today we are going to be looking at the tale of the losers. These are the tales of those who stood against an impossible enemy and were crushed beneath their boot. But that does not mean that their story should not be told. That's right, today we are going to be looking into Boudica and Zenobia. We will begin in chronological order with Boudica, whose name loosely translates to victory in ancient Scottish and Celtic. Given that she appears in ancient Roman history as an enemy, if any records of her life and times truly do exist, they are either heavily edited or lost to time. However, the primary sources that we have that indicate that she did indeed exist come from the authors Tacitus and Cassius Dio. While both accounts were made years after her revolt, Tacitus supposedly has an eyewitness account within it, and it is widely accepted that Cassius based his account on Tacitus's by simplifying the accounts within. That said, Dio and Tacitus have differing accounts about why Boudica began her revolt, but we will cross that bridge when we get there. Boudica was the wife of King Persudicus of Iceni, which is now modern-day Norfolk. In the year 43, Emperor Claudius, not Nero Claudius, just Claudius, began his conquest through southern Britain. Initially, King Persudicus agreed to side with the Romans, likely understanding that the might of an entire empire would crush his forces. This all became more difficult 4 years later, however, as after a slew of settlement uprisings against the Romans, the local Roman governor Publius Astorius Scapula planned to enact a full disarming of the natives. It is believed that Iceni was spared from this and Astorius' wrath, as Iceni remained independent after this. However, this could be because Persudicus was initially believed to be a pro-Roman ruler, and in some records he assisted Astorius in defeating uprisings. This support for the Romans is furthered that in his will, half of his wealth went to his daughters and the other half to Emperor Nero. However, what the king believes is good for the people is not always what the people want, and after his death in 60 or 61, the pro-Roman sentiment faded with him. This is generally attributed to the Romans' treatment of the non-Roman people that they conquered. While it certainly would vary from governor to governor, the idea that the people they were conquering were uncivilized barbarians was certainly an effective way of making war easier. King Persudicus left half of his fortune to Nero in hopes that it would be a sign of good faith, but it did not matter as Iceni would then be pillaged by the Roman centurions. Boudica would be lashed and tortured and her daughters would be raped. Prominent Icenians had their estates confiscated as though they were prizes of war. This is all according to Tacitus. According to Cassius Dio, he says that the cause of the pillaging was for money. Emperor Claudius had given money to many of those who were loyal to Rome in Britain, but after his death, the sums were now to be paid back with interest. Of course, this was not a part of the agreement, and many could not meet this demand, and as a result, they were pillaged. No mention of the torment of Boudica and her daughters in this account. If this is to be believed, the Boudican uprising would then be because of money. Now, it should be mentioned that many of these supposed speeches that Boudica gave to her people have been largely fictionalized by the authors. This, of course, does not mean that they did not happen, just that they have likely been dramatized to fit a different narrative. But one of these supposed speeches, and her own declaration of war, was to tell her people that those enslaved cannot enjoy the wealth that they own, and blames herself for not expelling the Romans as they had done before with Julius Caesar. The primary crux of this speech was essentially asking the question if one would rather have a higher quality of life as a slave, or to have a lower quality of life and be free. Of course, Boudica and her people chose to die standing rather than live kneeling. Thus, they went to war, in what is referred to as the Boudican Revolt. The first course of action was to gather allies sympathetic to their cause, and they recruited many of their neighbors who had been equally ransacked. They appointed Boudica as their leader. According to Cassius Dio, it is here that Boudica first invoked the name of Andraste, the British goddess of victory, to bless her army. The rebels' first target was the former capital of the Trinavations, whose people were among those that had joined Boudica's cause. The people had been treated incredibly poorly and forced to build a shrine to Claudius. The rebel army descended upon the city, poorly guarded at the time, and they destroyed it and the temple. A bronze statue of Nero that was in the city was also decapitated, and its head presented to Boudica. Another Roman dispatch led by Quintus Petilius Cerealis attempted to relieve the city, but was horrendously defeated, with only himself and a few others escaping alive on horseback. The rebellion became known to Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, the current governor of the region who had initially been out suppressing a different uprising. He quickly made his way to Londinium, but upon arrival, opted to give up the city as he lacked the resources to effectively defeat the rebels. Londinium was a Roman settlement at the time and was a quickly thriving city, but the rebels leveled it, burnt it to the ground, and tortured or killed any who were unable to escape. The rebels would then advance to Veralium, modern-day St. Albans, which is said to have been razed to the ground as well. Tacitus recounts that at most 80,000 people were killed in these revolts, and that the Britons took no quarter, killing through torture, public execution, or through burnings. During the assault of Veralium, Suetonius was attempting to amass a force to destroy the uprising. However, he only managed to gather 10,000 men against the approximate 230,000 of Boudicca's. Thus, Suetonius had to choose where to pick his fight. He chose a very narrow gorge, walled by a forest and an open plain. The forest would guard the rear, and the open plain would make the enemy visible to them. It was at this battle that Boudicca supposedly gave her famed speech to her army. Note, however, that Tacitus recorded this some 50 years after the event, so whether this is real, partially fabricated, or fully fabricated is completely up in the air. However, this is her speech, this version taken from Wikipedia. But now, she said, it is not as a woman descended from noble ancestry, but as one of the people that I am avenging lost freedom, my scourged body, the outraged chastity of my daughters. Roman lust has gone so far that not our very persons, nor even age or virginity, are left unpolluted. But heaven is on the side of the righteous vengeance. A legion which dared to fight has perished, the rest are hiding themselves in their camps, or are thinking anxiously of flight. They will not sustain even the din and the shout of so many thousands, much less our charge and our blows. If you weigh well the strength of the armies and the cause of the war, you will see that in this battle you must conquer or die. This is a woman's resolve. As for men, they may live and be slaves. While Boudicca and the Britons had the advantage in numbers, the Romans were better armed and armored, and they had a much more advantageous position. When the Britons charged, they were initially mowed down by Roman javelins, killing many and destroying the shields of others. From there, the Britons had to funnel through the narrow gorge as they were sequentially picked off. As their losses began to mount, the Britons attempted to retreat, but were clogged in the gorge by the wagons that they had set up in a crescent behind them. In total, it decided that 80,000 Britons died and only 400 Romans fell. Boudicca herself is said to have drank poison rather than bear the shame of being captured and tormented once again. When the news of all of this reached Emperor Nero, he was initially appalled and thought to withdraw from Britain, but after learning of Boudicca's defeat, opted to stay and retain southern Britain. However, Suetonius would be replaced as the governor as Nero feared that he may go on to provoke further rebellions. Thus, the tale of Boudicca comes to an end, with a failed attempt at maintaining her way of life and the Romans retaining her ancestral home. But now let's fast forward a bit from the year 61 to 240 when Zenobia was born. She was born a member of the Palmyrean, which is a tribal people made up of the Arabian and Aramean people. And as we have little to no information on her parents, we do not know of her exact origins. Palmyra was a subordinate state to Rome in near modern-day Syria. Let's now play in the realm of speculation based on evidence from almost 2,000 years ago, my favorite. In the Augustan history, it is speculated that Zenobia came from the same line as Cleopatra. This is supposedly supported by the 10th century Byzantine encyclopedia, making this claim dubious at best. Another offered lineage is the Queen of Sheba. This is traced back through the Arabic tradition and the apocryphal storytelling, but still hinges on the idea that the Queen of Sheba actually existed. It is, once again, a dubious claim at best. Much of this information is taken from the Augustan history, which was written as a pro-Roman piece of documentation, meaning that a lot of the information in it may have been slandered against the people who were against Rome. So keep that in mind when we discuss this topic. We do know, however, that Zenobia was of some noble lineage as she was given an education and became fluent in Greek, Egyptian, and Latin. At the age of 14, she married Odenathus, the then ruler of the Palmyrean and his second wife. This royal aspect would become heightened in the year 260, when Roman Emperor Valerian would march against the Persian monarch Shapur I, leading to Valerian's defeat and capture at Edessa. With this defeat, Odenathus was deemed king of Palmyra and began campaigning against the Persians. At this time, Palmyra was still loyal to Rome, and for his efforts and successes against the Persians, Odenathus would be dubbed the King of Kings of the East in 263. He would also be dubbed Corrector of the East and became the ruler of the lands between the Black Sea and Palestine. However, in 267, Odenathus and his eldest son, who he had appointed as his co-ruler, would be assassinated. In the coming years, Zenobia would become the Queen of Palmyra, though we do not know exactly when this happened. We do know, however, that she was the de facto ruler by 270, and that it is very likely that she filled the power vacuum as quickly as possible. It is stated by historians of the time that Zenobia was incredibly beautiful and accompanied her husband on many of his campaigns to help boost morale for the troops, and given her proper education, it can be assumed that she was well versed in a number of fields of communication education and ruling, making her a wise pick as the heir to the throne. However, before she took the reins, a man named Maeonius was emperor. He is attributed as being the one who led the assassination against Odenathus, a cousin of his, and out of jealousy of not being appointed as his second. This would not last long though, because he would be killed by his troops. Note that this is debated by historians, as all of this comes from one source, the Augustan history. It is believed by some that Zenobia had a hand in this assassination as well, being anti-Roman, but even if this were true, after taking the reins, she still continued her late husband's policies for some time. Now, I say that she became the ruler, and in a way, she did. But in reality, she was serving as a regent for her 10-year-old son, Valabathus. He was more or less kept in the shadows and never really ruled in his own right. However, a larger issue loomed over them. The Palmyra monarchy was new, and those who had become a part of it had sworn allegiance to Odenathus, not Zenobia, so the task of retaining this power fell upon her lap. This is what would inevitably leave Zenobia to war against the Romans. The Romans viewed Odenathus as an official of Rome, and that is why he is granted the position of king. The Palmyra officials viewed his position as king as hereditary. Thus, the Romans did not acknowledge Zenobia as the new ruler of the land, and certainly not as one to inherit the Roman titles her husband had held. That's right. This all begins with a misunderstanding. However, despite this, Zenobia picked up her husband's rule where he had left off. Many of the closer territories pledged allegiance to her, and according to the Augustan history, she claimed full control of the East at this time as well. There is no recorded instances of these lands experiencing any unrest, suggesting that the transfer of power went well for her. Zenobia even played this wisely, not marching on territories where Roman governors occupied, so as not to give the illusion of an invasion. Outside of reinstating her rule, her main focus was fortifying her defenses against the Persians, reinforcing her borders along the Euphrates River. She would also at this time begin a light expansion to better secure her kingdom's economy, citing the fact that Rome failed to provide for its provinces, and thus the success of her nation fell to her. She had to remain dominant in various regions if her people were to flourish. One such region was where the Tanakids were, who wished to break free from the Palmyran rule, prompting Zenobia to send an army to Bostra to maintain them. This, unfortunately, would be a major mistake. A Roman governor named Trassus attempted to prevent the Palmyrans from continuing, and in response, he was deemed an enemy, and he and his troops were killed. The general that Zenobia had sent, Septimus Zatus, rampaged through the city and destroyed the shrine to Zeus Haman. As he continued his march, he was met with no opposition. It is around this time that the coin minters in Antioch stopped printing coins with the face of the emperor and now minted ones of Zenobia's son. This suggests that she was attempting to grasp independence against Rome. She would then invade Egypt as her next target, likely in hopes of gaining a more advantageous trade route to the Euphrates. This was fairly easy, as the Roman grip on Egypt at this time had waned substantially. The place where they mostly met hostility was Alexandria, which was initially taken back by the Romans, but after a strategic plan, they managed to retake the city and the Roman governor committed suicide. Thus, Egypt was now part of Palmyra. This would be the peak of Zenobia's rule. She was viewed as a wise queen, adapted to dealing with peoples of all walks of life, and was well liked by her subjects, and it appears as though she came to some form of agreement with Emperor Aurelian, as Zenobia truly did attempt to avoid conflicts with the Romans if at all possible, save for her takeover of Egypt, which they appeared to have come to a compromise over, as Zenobia did not cut supply lines between the Romans and the Egyptians. In 271, Zenobia was given the title of Pious, which appeared to be a step in Roman acceptance. All was well for about a year before the mints completely removed Emperor Aurelian's portrait from the coins, which to the Romans was indicative of a full-on break. This is largely in part to Aurelian beginning a campaign near Zenobia's territory, which may have prompted her to declare herself empress, as she realized that otherwise the Romans would not recognize her as a ruler in an official capacity and take over her land despite the title they had granted upon her. Thus, the two sides prepared to clash. The Romans more or less marched a clear path to Syria and managed to retake Alexandria. Zenobia and her forces retreated to Antioch as the remainder of Egypt fell. Then, her forces in Antioch fell and she was forced to retreat to Emesa. In an attempt to conceal this catastrophic loss, she had a man who resembled Emperor Aurelian paraded about and claimed to have captured the emperor. This was done in hopes of raising morale, but would ironically come back to haunt her. This is also probably a full-on fabrication from the Augustan history. Her last stand was at Emesa, where her forces were destroyed. It is stated that she allied herself with the Persians in the Augustan history, but once again, there is no evidence to actually support this, and it is more likely written as a way to tie her to the Rome's largest adversary. She was captured as she attempted to retreat upon a camel, and Palmyra capitulated with the Romans soon after. While most captured would be executed, Zenobia and her son would be paraded around. There are varying accounts of her fate, one claiming that she was beheaded, another that she died before making it back to Rome, but the vast majority agree that she was paraded all the way back to Rome in chains of gold. Accounts after this also have a tendency to vary, though most of them do place her in the position of having lived out the remainder of her life in a Roman villa. Now, whether this was as a slave or as a freed woman is debatable. This is because some accounts claim that because of her immense beauty, Aurelian freed her and gave her the villa, others say that she remained a slave trapped there. Others still say that once she was freed, she remarried a Roman governor, and from there had several daughters who integrated into Roman society. This is the most dubious of these claims, as there is no evidence to suggest its authenticity. Further evidence against this claim is that Zenobia is believed to have died in 274, very shortly after her capture, either starving herself to death or from some illness. Zenobia is a tragic character in history as someone who only wanted what was best for her people, and became the initial victim to a severe misunderstanding. Her swift response in taking the throne to prevent a full-on power vacuum was absolutely the correct choice in the situation she found herself in, because otherwise it would have resulted in a likely civil war. She, much like Boudica, merely wanted their people to thrive. However, they were crushed by the might of Rome. Now the question was posed to me during the poll for this video: why is it that Rome is so often depicted as the villain in media? This, of course, is a complex question, and there are several reasons for it. Plainly, the Roman Empire was a conquering one. They wished to expand as far as they could and integrate as many people into their folds as possible. This meant that the Roman Empire was willingly receptive to foreign concepts, famously integrating traditions and gods of others directly into their pantheon. However, this does not change the fact that they still conquered others. This meant that those now under their rule had to provide tribute to the Roman Empire, and should they fail to do so, they would become enslaved. It was a prime example of having Big Brother always watching over you, and if you decided to raise a hand against them, you would be crushed. Not the best look from an outside perspective, and a historical one. The other major contributing factor comes from how the Romans dealt with the Christian religion, very notably being the ones who killed Christ. In the modern Western mindset, this is a huge crime and a blight on the empire. Even outside of the tale of Jesus, the way the Romans dealt with Christians was incredibly brutal. Examples being feeding them to lions, crucifying them, dismemberment, crucifying them, then lighting them on fire when you needed more light, etc., etc., etc. If you want the most clear-cut example of this resentment, know that the Book of Revelations was written as anti-Roman propaganda. That's right, the final chapter in the Bible was written to spite either Nero or Caligula, depending on how you read it. Your homework for this episode is to go listen to the last podcast on the left's episode on the topic to get all of these details, because they put it in a way better way than I ever could. I'll have the episode linked down below. It's a whole thing. But between these two reasons, amongst others that I do not have time to get into, the Western mindset on Rome is far from romantic. This is not to say, of course, that Rome was some evil empire. Every empire does the exact same thing with varying degrees of success, but I've gone on long enough already. Thank you so much for watching, I really do appreciate it. Let me know what you thought down in the comments. Subscribe to catch these as they go up. Like the videos, it really does help out the channel. Follow my Twitch for significantly less structured content. We now have a Discord, linked down below. And finally, I have a Twitter. But for now, keep your chin up. Peace.